Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew Does Hair. You can find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. Today I'm taking a break from hair videos. It's been really hard to get models in here because of the whole lockdown situation. And I want to talk about a camera lens, the Sigma 105mm f1.4 Art. This is an incredibly remarkable lens. Now let me say up front, this is not going to be a complete review. It's going to be more or less supplemental to the other reviews out there. I'm not going to talk about distortion or corner sharpness or any crap like that. I want to talk more about the experience of what it's like to own the lens and how it's been really remarkable for my own workflow. So any good review is going to cover the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get the bad out of the way right up front here. First is the price. This lens cost me, I want to say it was $1,600, and then there's like tax and maybe shipping on top of that. It's very expensive for a Sigma lens. You get so used to seeing Sigma lenses for like $900, $1,000 maybe. $850 to $950 is kind of average for a Sigma lens, and they're great lenses for that price. And so it makes it really intimidating to spend $1,600 on a third-party lens. And I was really unsure about that. Like, it's easy. Right now I'm recording on an RF 70-200. That lens was like $2,700. And it's easy to buy a Canon lens or a first-party lens, Sony, Nikon, for this kind of money. And in fact, you can get a lot of L-glass for well under the price of this lens. So that's a big, scary thing up front. It feels like spending 50 grand on a Kia. But I will say, I've owned the Sigma 24 Art, I've owned the 35 Art, I've owned the 50 Art, I've owned the 85 Art, and this is on another level. It's not even the same series. It should have been its own series. It's like that much better. And so that price up front is really intimidating for a Sigma lens. The second big drawback to this lens is the size and the weight. For a portrait-specific prime lens, it is freaking beefy. Like, I used to own Canon's EF 85mm f1.2, and that's like a big lens. But compared to this, it's nimble, it's little, it's light. This thing is girthy, and every review goes over that. But I want to add to it, it's not even so much that the lens is big and heavy, because I've had big heavy lenses before that you kind of cope with. I've had Canon's EF 70-200 Mark II, whatever, IS thing. I've had big lenses before, and you kind of get used to it. But this lens, my big complaint about the size, I could deal with a big lens. It's the ergonomics. It's like weirdly shaped. So if you look at the lens, it's very, very wide at the front. It has a 105mm filter, and that front is just completely covered in glass. Then it steps down. It's got like pyramid steps stepping downward to the mount. And so what this does, in your brain, there's so many ridges and steps along moving down the body of this lens that it's kind of weird. I'm like, wait, which one of these ridges here is the focus ring? And furthermore, part of the body here is ribbed just like the focus ring. And so in your brain, it's a lot to handle. You're just like, what am I holding? It doesn't feel smooth to the hand. Now, they do include this rubber band thing that can go in the place of the tripod collar. And I found that was a massive help because it makes a large portion of the body feel smooth and uniform. It makes it much easier to kind of grip it in your hand. At first, when I was using this lens, I just kept the tripod collar on it because it is that heavy and it is that front heavy that you would want to balance it with the tripod collar if you were to use a tripod. And so when I was using the tripod collar, I'd kind of manage the weight by the tripod collar. But what I found is the way that it sits, because the lens is not long like a 70-200 traditionally would be, but it is heavy in the front like a 70-200 would be. And so when you have that tripod collar there, it actually covers up the focus ring. So you're holding the collar and trying to work the ring by reaching around the tripod collar, and it's just not very easy. With this lens, if you have the tripod collar on here, you are not able to hold it by the ring. You have to hold it by the tripod collar, and it just gets kind of awkward feeling. And then on top of that, as I said, the lens is very, very front heavy. Like it's very apparent that all the weight is right there on that front piece of glass. And on top of it, it just flanges out so much right there. I feel like it's constantly pushing my hand back. So that's a big drawback as far as using it with the size and the weight. Again, with the rubber band thing, it's not so bad. It feels much, much better. And you kind of forget that you're using an irregular lens of sorts. It feels a lot more natural. Now, as far as packing goes, this lens being super wide at the front, the hood is even wider. And packing that hood is next to impossible. Throw on the tripod collar as well, and if you're gonna bring this lens along, you know you need it because it will not sit in a regular bag normally. Like, it doesn't fit the size of like a standard lens, it's that much bigger. So what I found is when I was using the hood for everything, mostly because I wanted protection in case I dropped it or bumped it. Like having that much glass exposed in the front is a little bit intimidating. So I was mostly using the lens hood to kind of protect the front of the lens. But when I was doing all of that, I realized that I just didn't bring the lens because I couldn't just throw it in my bag like I would with any other lens. I had to plan for it and rearrange compartments and make sure I really needed that lens. And so these days, I don't use the tripod collar, I don't use the hood, and I hope I don't regret either of those things, but what's that saying go? Like the best camera is the one that you have on you. And I found that as much as I loved this lens, I just didn't bring it often because it was hard to pack and hard to bring. This way though, it's much, much easier. So highly recommend ditch the tripod collar and the hood if you can do that. So one remarkable thing about this lens that makes it kind of stand on its own, there's maybe very few other lenses out there that can say this, but all of the bad is right up front. It's the size, the weight, the price. After that, there's no bad. The autofocus performance is, at least on my Canon EOS R, my EOS RP, has been perfect. I mean, it's accurate 99% of the time, and it's relatively fast. A lot of fast primes have very slow autofocus. This one is, moderately quick. It's never hindered my workflow. When I was using the EF 85mm f1.2, it was like frustrating to wait for that thing to focus. This thing is, it keeps up. The build quality is ridiculous. I did actually put a filter on here because I recently dropped my RF 70-200 and I broke the front element. It was a $900 repair. It was the saddest thing ever. And I never thought that would happen to me. Like I never thought I would be that guy. And after that happened though, I was like, all right, that's it. I'm buying a filter for everything. And so I got a Sigma protector filter for this. And it is really, really beefy feeling. Like, I mean, the edges of it are, it's weighty. It's got some weight to it. And so whatever, I'm adding some weight to an already heavy lens. But now I don't worry about that. I don't worry about the lens at all. Like I take it out and I use it and I don't worry about it. When I first bought it, I constantly used the hood because I was worried about touching the element against something, and I constantly used the tripod collar because I was worried about the weight of it being just too much on the body. But now that I've kind of gotten used to it, now that I have that protector on there, like I just throw it around like I would with any other lens. But the build quality is amazing. The focus ring is smooth, and it's a Sigma. It's a tank. So before I get into the more or less unique value that I found in this lens, I want to challenge the common commotion about this lens. It is called the bokeh master, and every review you see of it is showing you headshots or torso shots and how blurry the background is. I made a comment the last time I did this video, because this is my second review on this lens now that I've owned it quite a bit longer. And in the comment I said, if you just want blurry backgrounds on a headshot or a torso shot, you can get it for half the price and half the weight if you get Canon's 135 f2, or you can get it for a fraction of the price and the weight if you get Canon's 85mm f1.8. Now, I just ruffled feathers. I just compared a much cheaper, much crappier lens to this lens, but what I'm getting at is what you will get from 105 f1.4 versus 85 f1.8 when it comes to just like a torso shot is a negligible amount more background blur. And so people call this the bokeh master. It'll just obliterate backgrounds. But in these scenarios where, like what I do for my work is I shoot haircuts. If I'm shooting a haircut and it's maybe just a head and the shoulders in the frame, much like the framing you're looking at of me right now, what this brings to the table is not worth the size, the weight, and the price. That's a huge part of the reason I wasn't bringing it along, because if I shot something with my crappy little 85 1.8 and I shot it with this and I held them up side by side, 90% of people couldn't tell you which one was better. Photographers could sit and pick it apart and go, oh no, the sharpness is better on this one and the less contrast in the bokeh and more compression here. What I'm getting at is if you're shooting headshots, portraits, torso up shots, you can get a great deal of subject isolation and a great deal of blurry backgrounds with much cheaper, lighter, smaller lenses. And if you're looking at this lens specifically because you want more blurry background in those specific cases, I feel like the lens is too much money, too much size, too much weight, too much hassle. In fact, oftentimes when I'm shooting up close for a headshot, portrait, whatever, haircut photo, it is very, very easy for this lens to go too hard and give you too little depth of field. And I know it's kind of a beginner move to always shoot wide open, even when it's not the best time to do that. And with this lens, It is very, very easy to go too shallow. You try to shoot a haircut and you get like the eyeball in focus, but the eyebrow out of focus. Like that's how thin we're talking here if you're at like headshot distance. And so you might be throwing this thing all the way wide open to try to blur out that background, but you're gonna get a negligible amount of extra black background blur and your subject's gonna be out of focus. And so I feel like in those close-up, like more traditional portrait scenarios, this lens just goes too hard often. If you use it just right and you're really meticulous about your focusing and posing and framing and everything, you can actually get like medium format feeling portraits out of this. And to me, that was like a huge reason I wanted to keep this after buying it. Like I've always kind of wanted to get a medium format camera, but I don't want to spend $1 billion on a digital version, and I don't want to go through the hassle of film on a regular basis, so I just never really went the medium format route. But I found with this lens I can actually get like a medium format feeling out of my full frame camera. Let me go back to, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but of course this is going to be tremendously sharper than like the 85 f1.8. I'm not saying that this can replace that lens across the board. I'm saying that if you're shooting a tight headshot and you're not planning on zooming way in on the eyeball, you're going to get 90% of the way there for a fraction of the cost if you're shooting with this cheaper 85. But where the sharpness and everything comes into play, because see, I've never been like a huge like sharpness snob. I've never been like that turned off by like poor image quality. I've never been, I don't pixel peep, you know? But what I found with this lens after using it a little bit is, for one, that depth of field that can easily be too shallow up close maintains a remarkably more shallow than you expect feel as you focus even very far from the camera. So if I'm shooting like 30, 40 feet from the camera wide open, like it kind of blows me away how shallow that depth of field is. Now you can granted get a similar kind of feeling from like an 85 f1.8, but because this lens is sharp and because this lens doesn't have all the purple fringing and all that negative side effects, if I were to take a shot from across the room and I wanted to crop it in considerably later, I can do that with this lens, assuming I have, you know, high enough resolution sensor and whatever, but the lens is not gonna let me down when I'm cropped in 200-300%. Like it's staggering how good it is if you crop it later. Where with the 85 1.8, like sure, I'll maintain some blurry background from far away. I could get that as far as an overall image, but once I crop in, oh, there's problems. Sharpness isn't there, the purple is there, the green is there. And so that's one of the unique things I found about this lens that really changed my workflow in a lot of ways. There was a time where if I was trying to shoot something far away like that, I would never try to crop it so much in post because you just lose image quality to do that. But with this lens, I'll be cropping and I'm like, oh my God, I can get like 7 different photos out of this one photo. And so that's been really neat. Like, and on top of it, you know, when you do crop in so much, if you were shooting with like a 50mm 1.8 or a lens that was less remarkable in stats, by the time you crop in that much, your depth of field is not all that impressive. But this thing stays so impressively shallow, so far away, and so sharp that essentially, like, I want to call this lens the subject isolator. I can take a picture of something way over there, it's still isolated, and it's sharp enough that I can crop it into whatever I need it to be later. When I'm shooting portraits, obviously I can pose them and move them where I want them to be, and I don't need to use the lens in this way. Why would I add that extra step and lose some resolution in the end? But if I'm shooting my kid running around and I can't get her to stay still and my only option is to shoot her from way over here, I can crop that later and make a great image out of it. So this neat little factor about this lens being able to maintain such a shallow depth of field so far from the camera, it also means that if I'm shooting a very large subject, I can fit the whole subject in the frame and still maintain a pretty shallow depth of field. Typically, if I was gonna, like, I don't really shoot cars ever, but if you're trying to shoot something big like that, by the time you fit it in the frame, you know, everything's in focus. But with this lens, you can take pictures of cars, motorcycles, larger things like that, and still maintain a very stylized look with like a blurry background. So if I was ever to shoot a car or like a motorcycle race, as I just said, this is the lens that I would go for. And I've shot with like the 85 1.2, and it can, for the most part, get you that kind of look, but not without the purple fringing and the general softness. I mean, this thing is so ridiculously sharp and clean. It gives a look to these larger subjects that I've never seen with another lens. Maybe sometimes like the 135 f2, but even then, like 105 to 135 is a considerable difference as far as framing. Like this feels if I'm not thinking about it and I pick it up and I go, it feels more like shooting with an 85 than it feels like shooting with a 135. It doesn't feel restrictive as far as the focal length. To wrap it up, I've owned 2 lenses before where pretty quickly I decided I'm going to keep this one forever. One is the RF 70-200 that I'm recording with right now, and one was this lens. Every other lens I've ever owned, there's something about it that could be better, and in the back of my head I'm like, whenever something better than that comes out, I'm getting it. With this, I mean, I don't know, maybe smaller, like if they could do it smaller, I'll replace it, but it doesn't bother me that much. When I owned like Canon's 85 f1.2, the EF Mark II, I thought, okay, well, it focuses really slow and it has a lot of purple fringing. If they could fix that, I'd get it. And then I actually borrowed the RF 85 f1.2, which for the most part fixed those things. It focuses a little bit more quickly and quietly. And there's quite a bit less of the purple fringing and softness. But when I borrowed that lens, here's the funny thing. My friend that loaned it to me, I loaned him this lens, and we kind of traded. So I had the RF 85 f1.2 in my possession, and he had this. And when it came time to trade back, he was all, let's stay swapped another month. And it's so funny because every time I went and I picked up that RF 85, I was like, yeah, it's fun, it's cool. But it didn't feel as thrilling as using this lens. It didn't feel as capable. Like this feels faster and it's heavier and everything. But something about this lens was just a little bit magic that actually the RF 85 doesn't have. And I can't even put my finger on what it is. It's just a feeling with this lens. It just turns the world into a magical place. I don't know how to say it. So if you're just doing head and torso shots, unless you very specifically know that you want the most impossibly thin depth of field for more of a medium format feeling to your portraits, I don't recommend the lens. If you're doing it because you just want a blurrier background in your head and torso shots, it's not that much blurrier. But if you want to be able to shoot things from further away and maintain that shallow depth of field, this lens is great for that. If you want to be able to shoot things from further away and then crop it considerably in post, this lens can do that really well. If you want to shoot something very large in the frame and still have that kind of blurred out background, this lens can do that very well. I hope this was informative, and I hope it was a different perspective on a lens that I feel all the reviews tend to kind of be the same thing. Look how blurry the background is. Look how blurry the background is. Yes, okay, we know it can blur the background in a shot like this one. What else can it do? Hopefully you know now. Thank you.